Good afternoon, everybody. It is July 5th, 2025, and I thought I would make a video today for clients and people that are interested in buying and investing in Panama about the subject of property tax. This is something that obviously I get asked about quite often, and oddly enough, a lot of people ask me about it after they've made the decision to buy a property. So I think it's important to get it out there and get the information out there for people to look at before they buy a property. Now, that being said, property taxes in Panama are very kind. They're not very aggressive compared to a lot of other countries, especially Canada and Europe. So Panama is just looking to collect enough taxes basically to maintain the infrastructure and help make some improvements as they go along. They're not being super greedy about most of the property tax programs, and they're very progressive, and they operate on an increasing scale based on the value of the properties. So they're set up that a lot of Panamanians, especially in the interior, own homes that are under $120,000, and henceforth they pay no property taxes. So let's talk a little bit of this. You'll notice me reading today a little bit as we go over. Obviously, there's a lot of numbers to remember. I know most of them by heart, and these things do change a little bit depending on what government's in. So that's why I think it's important that I announce the date at the beginning of this video, because 6 months from now, a year from now, this could change. So the information's current as of right now. So if you have a primary property, okay, that's your primary residence in Panama, and that property is valued under $120,000, you pay zero. That's right, a big fat goose egg. Also, if your property is valued at $200,000, the first $120,000 is free. You pay no property tax on your principal residence on your first $120,000. Now, after that, there's a 0.5% property tax rate, which not long ago was actually 0.8. So, and before that it was 0.6, and now it's 0.5. So sometimes Panama changes stuff and they don't tell us, they just change it, and then somebody asks me, I go look it up, and all of a sudden it's different than it was a year ago. So as of right now, the first 120 is free, and then from 120 to 700,000, it's 0.5. So that means if you buy a home that's worth $200,000, you're only paying 0.5 on $80,000. After $700,000, the rate bumps up to 0.7. So what that would mean is that the first 120 is free, then from 120 to 700,000 is 0.5, and then from 700,000 and above, it would be 0.7. So if you bought an $800,000 home, you're only paying 0.7 on the last $100,000, and you're paying 0.5 on the first from 120 to 700. Okay. So for secondary residences, that means if you have an investment property, Airbnbs, things that are you have a primary already and you put a second property in your name, then it's a different tax rate. So the first 0 to 30 is 0%. The 30 to 250,000 is 0.6. 250 to 500 is 0.8, and over 500 is 1%. Okay, still, I think very reasonable. When I left Canada, I think I was sitting at 3.4 or 3.7% on my last residential home. So it's very, very reasonable even when it comes down to that, okay? Now, you're saying, what counts as a primary resident? Well, you can't have a primary residence if you're not a Panamanian citizen or a permanent resident. So first step is you have to get your residency, and this is definitely an advantage to going through the residency process, is you suffer from lower tax rates. So that's very important, okay? You do not have to live here full time, but it does have to be your primary residence. Also, it can't be rented out full time either, okay? So you can't buy a home, rent it out full time, and then claim permanent residence on that. So usually what you do is you get your lawyer to submit the proper paperwork in order to register as your primary residence, and then you enjoy the benefits of that, okay? Taxes are paid April 30th, August 31st, and December 31st. You can pay them annually, you can pay them quarterly, you can pay them monthly. It depends on how you set it up with the DTI. So it's not that bad whatsoever, okay? How is property value determined? That's very, very important. Where I'm from in Canada and a lot of other places in America, they do what's called an assessment. It's done by an agency. In Ontario, Canada, it's done by an agency called Impact. And in different states and different provinces, they have different agencies that function the same way. Here, it's based on the declared value. So when you buy the property, if it has a house on it, you're going to declare the value of that house, and then that's where you're charged property taxes on. Also, if you buy a piece of property and then you build a house and then you register that house, then that changes the declared value of what's called the improvements on the property, and then the property taxes are based on what the improvements are and the value of the improvements that have gone on for the construction. Okay, so 2019, I think they changed this rule, and before that what they did is new construction had 20 years exemptions of zero property tax, and I still get asked about that all the time. When they brought in this $120,000 exemption rule, they scrapped the 20-year exemption benefit. Other than there's some areas still in places like Casco Viejo that have their own special investment rules and laws and regulations, but the majority of Panama, they scrapped the 20-year exemption. But there's still properties around that fall into that 20-year exemption. So if you buy into a property that, let's say it got in just at the very end of it and it still has 10 or 12 years remaining on it, you will benefit from no property taxes. Then when that runs out, you can then apply for the 120 exemption after that 20-year exemption runs out. So there's kind of a dual system that happens, but they're not doing that anymore. So if you build a new property, there's definitely benefits to it though, where you have an exemption for the first 120,000, and then 120 to 300 there's a 10-year exemption, and then over 300 there's a 5-year exemption. But that only applies to the building, not to the land. So it gets a little bit complicated. This is why we have tax lawyers, accountants, and real estate lawyers that were actually know this better than anybody because they deal with it every day. So it's very, very important to consult them if you're getting involved in this on what program you should be involved in. I'm giving you an overview today so you know the gist of how things work. How to check your property taxes. You go to DGI, which is the Panamanian Tax Agency. In Canada, we have the CRA. In America, they have the IRS. And in European countries, I don't know what each one's called. Here it's called the DGI, and there's a link on the DGI, and you put in your Finca number or your folio number and a few other information. You create an account, and then it will give you what you owe in property taxes. It's very important not to let these fall behind. Otherwise, when you go to sell your property or your house, all of a sudden you're in a position where you got to catch up on all that stuff, and the penalties can get steep if they're not being taken care of over the years. So if you don't know how to do it, you can't read the Spanish, it's important to have an accountant or a lawyer take care of this for you. It's not very expensive to have them do it. Okay. Capital gains. Okay, I'm not going to talk hugely about this today. But basically, when you sell a property, there's a 2% transfer tax and a 3% capital gains tax if it's in your personal name. However, if you're selling a corporation or a foundation, there is a 5% flat transfer tax on the values of what you're selling for. But I'm going to do a whole other video related to that. I really, really don't want to get into that today. So we're not going to get into that. If you have any other questions, and if I can answer them, I'll answer them. If I can't answer them, I'm going to refer you over to one of the accountants or the real estate lawyers that I work with to answer them more in depth. Feel free to reach out to me with any questions regarding this issue, and I'll either answer them or connect you with the right people that can. Okay, thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy this video and the article. This is Ken from Panama Properties, and if I can help you with any of your real estate needs, connect you with a broker, or help you myself, I am very happy to do that. Have a good day.